Hey guys, today in this tutorial we're going to be creating a wave generator blueprint. So what that means is if you've ever played a wave game where a bunch of enemies spawn in and you need to kill all the enemies and the next wave starts, like that sort of thing. That's what we're going to be making today. The way that it's going to work is we're going to have a big map and we're going to place in the editor a bunch of different spawn points around the map. So we'll have like spawn points for ground enemies, for air enemies that'll be up in the air, for turrets which might be like on the edge of towers or something, and you can also have like special ones for lava and whatever. The wave will start, it'll spawn a bunch of enemies at all those points, it'll check to see if all those enemies are still alive or dead, and then once they're all dead it'll move on to the next wave. And the way that it's going to get its information about which enemies to spawn is we're going to use a data table. Which makes it super easy to change the amount of enemies that you want, the classes of enemies and everything like that. It makes it just really easy to edit. If you've never used a data table or you've never done any of the stuff that is listed here, which is just going to be this is a quick skeleton of what we're going to be going through, don't worry because it is all very simple and I'll explain it all as we go. So just how it's going to work, like roughly, is we're going to have a blueprint that gets all the positions that we're going to use to spawn the enemies in. There's going to be a countdown. We'll use a wave number that's stored in our blueprint to figure out which enemies we want to spawn in, and then we're just going to check if all those enemies are still alive, and then when they're all dead we'll just go back to the top, new wave, blah blah blah, and go all the way through to the end. So let's just crack into it. First thing I'm just going to do is I'm just going to make the map a little bit bigger. Just like that. I'm not going to make it like too fancy or anything, it's just going to be super simple. Excuse that crude language right there. Must have been left over from another tutorial. So I'm just going to go to content here. I'm going to create a new folder and just call this Wave Arena. And we're just going to store everything inside of this. So this can just be test wave map. And down here in your content browser, I'm just going to change the color of that. So you right click that, you go set color, and then we'll make that like pinkish or something like that. Okay. So open that up, we've got our test wave and everything down there. I'm just going to move that across because my microphone's up sitting next to the screen and it's kind of blocking my view. My microphone just fell. Soz. Probably just destroyed your eardrums. Okay, so the first thing that we'll make is we'll go new blueprint class. This will be of type actor, and we're going to call this wave spawn point BP, and then we're going to create another blueprint class, and this one can be wave manager BP, and that's going to be the one that does all the spawning and everything like that. So let's look at the spawn point first. So this is going to be the things that we place into the editor to tell it where to spawn the enemies from each wave. So what we might do first is we might just chuck in a billboard so that they're easy to see, and this little sprite thing will do. Let's put that up about 100 units or so, maybe like 200 units. And let's just drop one of those in the world. So that is where one enemy is going to spawn, just like that. I don't know, we might have a couple of these floating around. Let's just put them wherever, it doesn't matter. There we go, that'll do for now. Now what we want to do is we want to have different types of these spawners. So we want to have ground ones, air ones, and things like that, so that we can tell the wave manager to spawn ground enemies at the ground ones. Maybe you'll have like flying enemies in the sky, you might have some that are in like lava or like whatever. So you don't want like ground enemies spawning in the air or enemies that are meant to be flying spawning on the ground. So let's just set that up. The first thing that we do for that is we want to create what's called an enumerator. So if we go into here and we go enumeration, let's just call this enemy types _e. And in here, this is just like a fancy thing that we use to make it easy to switch in blueprints. That probably didn't make any sense, but it doesn't matter. Let's just demonstrate. So that can be ground, that can be air, we might have another one called turret, and we'll have another one called, I don't know, just like special or something, and you can add more of these later on. I'm a little bit rusty in Unreal. It's been a while since I've actually used this, so bear with me if it takes me a while to get things going. I've been taking a little bit of a break. I've been spending way too much time in front of screens. Okay, so let's go into the construction script, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a new variable down here, and we're going to call this spawner type. We'll make that public by ticking the I so we can edit it, and then we're going to make the type of this enemy types, just that thing that we created just before. And drag that in, hold control and drag, and then drag off of that and say switch on enemy types. And now what we're going to do here is we're just going to change this billboard depending on which enemy types we've got, so that we can see which one's which. So we could say set sprite. You know what would be even better than using this actually? Let's delete that, and let's off of new sprite say select. And then if we drag spawner type down here and plug that into index, that'll actually change that to this thing here. So now that we've got access to all those different possibilities. So let's say if it's a ground type, let's just have this creepy old man face. If it's an air type, we can have the that dinosaur thing. What the hell is that called? What's this? S_actor. That lizard. And that doesn't want to show up. Oh, let's just chuck whatever else in. It doesn't really matter, it's just as long as you know which one's which. So that can just be a circle, this one can be this one, and this one can be... You're probably wondering why I have that fucking terrifying face on here. That's a really good question. I must have been using that for an enemy or something, which is just horrifying. Okay, so anyway, fucking look at this guy. Imagine having that thing just chase you down a hallway or something with glowing red eyes. Okay, so these are all ground types, and down here in the default, if we were to change that to air, so for example that could be an air spawner up in the air like that. Let's actually have one of each just to test. We could have a turret one over here, so that's all really big as well. You could also change the scale of these, but I'm probably not going to worry about that. But the way you do that is you just say set scale, I think, or set world scale 3D, yeah. So this is 111 for all of those. Like you could just say select and then plug that spawner type into there, and then you could change the scale, but I'm not going to do that because I just cannot be bothered. Just if you wanted to make it look a little bit neater in the editor. Okay. So I think that is actually all that we need to do with this guy, to be honest. All we need is just his transform. So let's just leave them like that, and let's open up the wave manager. Well, actually, let's put a wave manager in here first. Now, let's just give this guy a billboard as well, so that we can actually see him in the editor. I don't know, what have we got here? UE4 logo. Cool, man. Let's just use that. So this is going to be our wave manager. By having a billboard, it makes it easy to click on things as well, just like that. So that's our wave manager right in the middle. Now, the first thing that we want the wave manager to do is we want it to save the transforms of all of the what do we call those other things that we just placed in? The enemy spawning things. So we'll say get all actors of class, and it was called enemy... No, it wasn't. It was called wave spawn point. Wave spawn point BP, and out actors. What are we going to do here? I guess we'll save this and we'll say enemy spawn points. Just like that. Should we sort through them now and figure out which ones are which? Yeah, we probably should. Okay, so let's go for each loop. And we'll say get... What was it? Enemy get type? Get spawner type. And then I guess we could say switch on enemy types like this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create an array of each of the separate types of spawn point. So what we're going to do here is we're going to separate the enemy spawn points into different arrays of just each type. So we'll have an array of the ground types, an array of the air types, or etc, etc. So if this one here is all the enemy spawn points, we might duplicate that, and we might call this, let's just shorten that for E, and then we'll just call that ground, and we'll have one for air, one for lava, and one for special. So E underscore air, E underscore turret, E underscore special. Okay, so what we'll do here is we'll go add array off of each of these spawn points over there. So if it's ground, we're going to add it to, can you do select with these? Let's see. No, we can't. Okay, so let's just copy this a bunch of times. We want one for each pin. So air, that one, turret, this one, special, this one. And in each case we're going to be adding the current array element, so we could just put this into all these like that. And ground can go into the top one like that. Air can go into this one. I don't need to narrate what I'm doing. I'm sure you understand. Okay. So now what we should have is, after we begin play, is we'll have a reference to all the enemy spawn points, and we'll also have an array for each type of spawn point so that we can use those later. Now after that's done, I guess the first thing that we want to do is we want to start the countdown to the next wave, so we can have an event in here. I'll start the countdown to the first wave. Now I'm just going to do this with a print string. I can't be bothered doing a little widget on the screen. I'm sure there are plenty of tutorials for how to do that, or you could just figure it out if you've used widgets before. And then off of complete here, I'm going to say countdown. So start countdown. And I might just comment this. So I'll comment all of this and just call this sort enemy spawner references. Okay. So now we start the countdown. The best way to do that would probably be just to set timer by event, maybe. Have a custom event down here which could be called count. Time can just be 1 second, so we'll count down by second, and that can be looping. And then what we're going to do is each time we count, we're just going to say print string. Oops. And we're going to be counting, I don't know, let's just call that count or time. Sorry, I just typed in anyway, integer. So when we start the countdown, we'll set our time to probably like 10 seconds. So we'll count down from 10 each time. Or maybe let's make this short because it's a tutorial and I don't want to spend too much time waiting around. So we set the time to 3. We print the time that's there, and then what we're going to do is we're going to decrement this, which means just decrease it by 1. And then what we'll do is we'll have a branch and check if the time is equal to 0. In other words, if the time's run out. So we'll say equal to 0 like that. Now if it is equal to 0, then what we'll do is we'll clear the timer up here, so it'll stop counting down, and we'll have another event down here which can be called begin wave. And if it is equal to 0, we'll stop counting and we will begin wave, just like that. Okay, and we can just highlight all of this and just call this countdown. Now if you wanted this to be a widget, you'd create a widget up here and you'd have the time variable, instead of printing it like that, you'd have it update a number that's shown on your HUD or something. Okay, and for begin wave, let's just type in print string here, and let's just test that this is working so far. Begin wave. Okay, let's jump in. 3, 2, 1, begin wave. Okay. So that began at 1 instead of... So let's just take this. It began at 1 instead of 0, so I'm just going to copy that and put that over here instead, I guess. So if it's not equal to 0, sorry. If it's not equal to 0, we'll decrement, and if it is equal to 0, then we won't. So let's just try that now. 3, 2, 1, begin wave. So it's printing up in the top left of the screen. Sorry if I'm not explaining all of this very well so far. I'm a little bit tired today, but I just felt like doing this anyway, so hopefully just watching me go through it all is helpful enough. I'll do the best to explain it, but I don't really have the intellectual capacity at the moment, but that's fine. I'm just going to take a sip of my water. Hold up. I've been super tired lately, I don't know why. I've started eating just vegetarian, and I'm thinking, it's been 2 weeks now, and I'm thinking maybe that's starting to just destroy me somehow. Like, I've just been sleeping heaps. Okay, so that's working fine. So for the begin wave, we want to get a pool of enemies from a data table for each specific wave. So what we're going to do down here is we're going to add a new variable, and we're going to call this wave number. And when we begin, we want the wave number to be 1, I'm going to say. We'll start at wave 1. And then when we begin wave, we're going to get the wave details for wave 1. Now to do that, we're going to use a thing called a data table. If you've never used a data table, this is really easy, so don't be intimidated. Some people make it really complicated, but it doesn't need to be. Where's the data table? So if you go to miscellaneous, you go to data table. We need a struct for that first, actually, so let's right click in here and let's add a structure. So blueprints and then structure, and we're going to call this, actually let's call this wave info, like that. So each wave is going to have a bunch of details that we're going to include in here. So each struct can be an enemy class, so actor class. We'll have enemy number, so this will be the number of enemies of that class that will spawn on this wave. It'll have a enemy type as well, which will be ground, air, lava, etc, etc. And this is of, what did we call that again? Something type? Enemy type. What did we call a enumerator? Enemy types E. Okay. I think that's all we're going to need. So let's just try and roll with that. So if we go back into our... actually, hang on. What we're going to need is we're going to need another struct. Sorry, this will make sense in a sec. Just let me show you what I'm doing, and then I'll explain it. So this can be called enemy info, and this one we'll call wave info. And inside of wave info is we're going to have an enemy info struct, but it's going to be an array like that, and we'll call that enemy infos. So what we're going to do is, if we create our data table now, which was in miscellaneous and then data table, and this is going to be wave info, and we'll create that, and we're going to call this well, this data table here is, you could copy this and have all kinds of different enemy combinations for different levels. So you could have multiple of these data table assets. I'm just going to call this one wave info data table 01, because this could just be like level 1, for example. So we'll open that up, and this is how this is going to work. So if we add a row, now this is the first row, new row, we have an option here to add info down here. So say for level 1 we want an enemy. Do I have any enemies in here? Maybe let's just quickly create an enemy blueprint. So we'll just go blueprint class actor, and we'll just call this enemy 01, and it's literally just going to be a block. I don't want to make any AI in this, we'll just keep this simple. So we'll just add a cube in like that. So the enemy class can be enemy 01, looks like I did have some other enemies. We could have, I don't know, maybe like 3 of them spawn in, and they all spawn at ground points. Now, we could also add into enemy infos, we could have a second enemy. So this one could be basic enemy, whatever the hell that is. I've obviously made that for another tutorial, and I'm not sure what that is. So let's add basic enemy, and maybe we can just have one of those in wave 1. And that one can be an air enemy, like that. And so what you do is you add all the different enemies that you want to spawn in here, the number that you want to spawn, so 3, 5, whatever, and then the type of spawner that you want them to spawn at. And then when that's done, you can just close that. And so this is wave 1, and then we can add another one here for wave 2. And you can do whatever the hell you want in this one for wave 2. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Let's actually test if this works. So now what we want to do is when we begin the wave, we're going to want to get the first row. So I think I might need to rename these. So this will be wave 1, like that. And this one can be wave 2, row 2. So inside of the wave manager blueprint, what we're going to need to do is we're going to say get data table row. And I guess the row name will just be the wave number. So can I convert that to a name, to string, and then to name? Yeah, okay, just like that. And then the data table, we'll just put in oh no, actually what we'll do is we'll promote that to a variable. So this can be called enemy data table. And then we can make that public, so what you can do is you can use different data tables for different levels. Okay, so let's just put that down there. Now we want to make this enemy thingo wave whatever. Why is this all being silly and stuff? What if I just type in break wave info? Okay, that works. It's been a little bit silly there. Okay, so now that we've got enemy infos, we can go for each. Well, if there's no row found, let's just put a print string down here. And let's just say couldn't find row for wave data. Just so we know what's gone wrong, if it happens. So now enemy infos will break this. So what we want to do off of enemy type is we'll have another select node. So let's type in select, right click and click select. And we're going to have enemy type plugged into there like that. And then this is going to return the set of spawn points associated with that type. So we'll put ground in there like that, air. I'm just control dragging here to drop those in like that as get. So maybe what we could even do is we could make this a little function, and we'll just say spawn enemies like that. So inside of this function, we'll promote this to a local variable, and we'll call this current spawn points, like that. So the first thing that we'll do when we want to spawn the enemies from the wave is we'll get the relevant spawn points, like that. And then what we'll do is we might actually just promote this to a variable, a local variable, so that we can reference this later without tangling spaghetti everywhere. So this can just be enemy info ref. We'll just call that ref, or you could call it like a local for local, lock for local. Anyway, so now that we've got this, let's split that and we'll do a for loop. So this is for the number of enemies that we're going to be spawning. The first index can be 1, and the last index will just be whatever number we've got there. So if the number of enemies that we want to spawn is 1, then this will run once. If it's 5, it'll run 5 times, like whatever. So now for the loop body is we're going to say spawn actor from class, and the class of enemy that we're going to spawn is the class from the enemy info struct, and the spawn transform is going to be a random transform from one of these points. So we'll get this here, our current spawn points will say get a copy, but the index of the copy that we want to get, we want to be random. So what we're going to do is we're going to say last index. So we'll get the last index of the array, and then we'll say not max, we want random in range, random integer in range, and we want the max to be the last index and the min to be 0. So that'll get us a random element of this array. And then what we want to do is we want to get the transform of the billboard. So what we'll do is we'll say get billboard. The billboard was that icon that we set up that was 200 units above the root. So if we say get transform of that, get world transform of that, and then plug that into spawn transform, that'll spawn an enemy of that class at that spawn point. And just for the collision handling override, let's say try to adjust location but always spawn, because sometimes you might get 2 enemies that are spawning at the same point. There you can set it up so that when you get a random one from here, you could mark the ones that have already spawned an enemy and make sure that it doesn't pull one of those same ones again, but I do not have the brain power for that today. I just want to get this tutorial finished and have something that's decently functional. It doesn't really matter, they should just adjust normally here anyway. So that'll spawn an actor. Now what we want to do here is we want to say add to an array, and we're just going to call this array current enemies, and this is going to be a regular variable, not a local variable. I'll call it current alive enemies, or something like that, or current wave enemies, because they're not necessarily going to be alive. Some of them will be dead after you kill them. So current enemies will just do. Okay, so that should be all good. So what this is going to do is when we begin the wave, we get all the enemy info for that particular wave. Now the enemy info contains a class of enemy, the number of that class that you want to spawn, and the enemy spawner type that you want it to spawn at. So then what that's going to do is for each of those classes that you've got in here, it's going to spawn the appropriate number of enemies at the appropriate location there, and it's going to save a reference into current enemies. So when this is done, I guess we can have another event down here, which we'll call check if enemies are dead. And then off of completed, we'll say check if enemies are dead. And now this here is going to be a loop, so maybe this should be called start checking if enemies are dead. So what we're going to do here is, I don't know, we might chuck in a delay and we'll check every, I don't know, 1 second or something. And what we'll do from that is we might actually create a function to do this. So can I create a function just from that? No. So let's have a for each loop. And can I create a function from this? Alright, collapse to function, and we're going to call this check if all enemies are dead. Okay, and inside of that, what we might do is we'll have a local variable called dead with a question mark, and when we begin we'll set that to true. This will make sense why in a second. So we'll set that to true, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of the current enemies and we're going to say is valid. And now if any of them are valid, then we're going to set that to false. But if all of them are not valid, then this won't get set to false and it'll still be true, and then we can have our return node down here and have that as an output on the return node. Okay, so now we'll have a branch off of this. Now if all the enemies are not dead, then what we're going to do is we're going to have a reroute node. Actually, let's move this delay down here. So the reroute node can go into that and then up into that. Sorry, we don't even need a reroute node. Let's just put that like that. That looks pretty cool. The aesthetics in the blueprint are very important. So when we start checking if the enemies are dead, we run our check if they're dead, and if they're not, we wait a second and then we check again. And if they are, then I guess what we can do is we can just start the next wave and we should be done. So let's just comment this and let's just say this is spawn enemies for wave. And if that's true, we could just say, I don't know, spawn sound 2D to just let you know that you've killed all the enemies. So in real game you'd have like a happy little jingle that's like, oh, you know, you won, but because we don't have any cool sounds in here, let's use a explosion collapsing sound. You could have a message on the screen pop up as well, and then you just begin the countdown, I guess, for the next wave. But before you do that, actually, is you would want to increment the wave number. So we'll increment the wave number and then we'll go to the next wave, and because we've incremented the wave number, when we get to begin wave here, this will read the next row from the data table and get you a whole bunch of new enemies for the next wave, and that should be just about done. So this is check if enemies are dead and start new wave. Now you could have a max as well, so you could have like a boss wave or something, so when you go to new wave number there, or you increment the wave, you could have a branch, and if it's, say, greater than such and such, then you could go to like a credit screen or like finish the game or whatever, instead of starting a new countdown. But I'm not going to do that here. You can do that depending on what you want for your game. So I guess that is like functional now. So 3, 2, 1, we should get the first wave of enemies. Yeah, there they are. We've got some blocks over here. I don't know if you can see them because they're white. They're a bit hard to see against the clouds. But there we go. And then up in the sky up there like that, that must have been my basic enemy that I was telling you about earlier. So he's just spawned in the air because we set him to have a air spawn point as his location. So once you kill all of those, which I can't be bothered doing right now. Oh, we have an error. What's that all about? Crosshair. Oh, don't worry about that. That was just a little thing. You might have saw I switched to first person in the middle of that. That was something I set up in a previous tutorial. So don't worry about that. Once I kill all of those, this should begin the next countdown and then get the next bunch of enemies and then start the next one. And that's basically it, I'm pretty sure. Like, this is obviously very basic and a piece of shit, and you could make this a lot neater. Like, for example, when you start the countdown, you could have a sound and a big message appear on the screen. You could have the countdown actually occur on the HUD instead of just a print string. When the wave begins, you could have a spooky noise. You could say spawn sound there or spawn sound here. But that's basically it. That's a wave generator, and once you finish the final wave, you could have like a big particle system of like confetti or something like that, and make it big celebration. So just to show you how this happens, because I've got a feeling I glossed over a bunch of this, and this bit's kind of important. It's very important that in the column over here, you name this as the integer that you want these enemies to spawn at. So when the wave number gets to 3, it'll spawn such and such. So you add in a new element here for each different type of enemy you want. So maybe you want 3 different classes of enemies. If you right click this and go expand all, then you can view everything. You put the class in, so you put your enemy class in there, which fuck face. Man, what have I been doing in this project? Jesus Christ. So we could have 69 fuck faces. And they could spawn at the turret points, and say, like, if you had, I think this was a turret point over here, I chose a shitty billboard for that, but you could have a billboard that actually looked like a turret, and that'd make it easy for you in the editor to see what's going to spawn where, and etc, etc. And so, like, this guy could spawn like up on top of like a box or something, and he could be a turret that shoots down at you down here while you're running around. Okay, so yeah, the class of enemy, the number, and where you want them to spawn, and you can have that as many different things as you want there. And I think that's basically it. Hopefully most of this made sense. It probably didn't, but if you follow along with what I've done, you'll be able to reproduce it, and you'll be able to modify it and create it to do whatever you want it to do. I have used this in a game of my own, which I'm not selling, but you can download it for free if you want. It's called Running Robot Man. You can get that from Game Jolt. I'll put that in the description if you want to play that. But it's 100% a wave game that uses this exact model, pretty much. It's got like 70 waves, and each time you go through, it spawns a bunch of ground enemies, air enemies, turret enemies, and etc. etc. And then when you kill them, it makes sounds, and the HUD changes, and you get all the way to the end, and there's a boss battle and some music and all that. So if you want to see what you could potentially do with this, give that a crack and see if you can beat it. It's a fucking hard game. I can hardly beat it myself, but my little brother can beat it. He's obsessed with games and he gets really good at shit. So anyway, that was just a massive tangent. But if you have any questions about any of this, let me know and I'll do my best to answer. Like I said, like I am in a retarded, sleepy state today, and I'm not sure why, but I just felt like making this tutorial. So if you leave me any questions that you've got, chances are I'll be in a much better position to answer it and explain it a lot more clearly later on. So drop me any questions that you've got and I'll get back to you about that. If there's a particular tutorial that you want me to make as well, leave me a comment and I'll do my best to get around to it. I'll see if I feel like doing it. I haven't made any tutorials in like, I don't know, like 6 months at least. It feels good to be getting back into them, so let me know if you've got any requests and I'll see if I can get around to them. But that's it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.